Hello and welcome back to Stopbox here live from Resourcing Tomorrow in London. I'm very pleased to be joined by Baroness Northover, who is the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Critical Minerals. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. I just caught a little bit of your panel there. But first of all, could you just tell me a little bit about the role of the Parliamentary Group and what you bring to that role?
Well, I think there was quite a bit of concern about the United Kingdom and its lack of interest in critical minerals.
Okay.
And so the all-party group was set up to try to encourage the government to move forward. And in 2022, the government issued its first strategy on critical minerals, and we'd been set up before that. And it consisted of a few parliamentarians who had that as an interest. We've obviously had another general election, and I'm really pleased to see that there are a number of new MPs with an interest in this area, not least, of course, the Cornish MPs who've got a great interest in this area in Cornwall.
Yeah, well, the Cornish MPs, I believe they're coming today. I'm hoping to get an interview with them because, of course, they've got the Cornish Pavilion. There's 6 mining companies from Cornwall coming up, and it's great. And my father is Cornish, so I spent a lot of time down in Cornwall. So you see the mines, But it's difficult, I think, for investors to get mining in the UK because we don't see it. It's not like America or Australia. But down in Cornwall, they potentially could be a hub in the UK maybe for mining.
Yes, and that's something that they're very much supporting. And so my co-chair is a Cornish MP.
Okay.
And no doubt he'll be here today.
So the UK's position on securing its critical materials, and what's the UK's position? Is it being taken quite seriously now at the government level?
Well, it did seem to me in the last government that they suddenly and finally got it, that this was significant. But what they didn't do was really put resources behind that conclusion. And that's what I'm hoping to see now.
Okay.
So they refreshed their strategy in 2023. And it's very useful that they have expert advice on which minerals are the critical minerals, and that group have just reported last week, and there are 34 minerals in that group.
Okay.
And it more or less overlaps with the EU's list as well.
Right.
So that's very helpful. But what needs to happen now is the government has just launched a draft industrial strategy. That's incredibly welcome, and that will be concluded in the spring. And I think it's incredibly important that people feed in the importance of critical minerals for the renewables, for batteries, for EVs, for wind turbines, and so on. It's absolutely vital that we do secure this supply chain, and we even with what's happening in Cornwall and in the north of England and potentially Scotland, we don't really have those sources ourselves, and therefore we need to be looking overseas.
Okay, and this is coming out from this industrial strategy. I did catch the end of your panel there, and I think the question was...
Well, what I'm saying is that in that industrial strategy, it needs to be recognised that this is very important. Now, the draft does acknowledge that, but I think that we need to make sure that the urgency of this and the need to put proper resources in is there. So this government has said in its budget that it's separating out what it's doing in terms of sort of day-to-day spending from investment. That's welcome, and that they need to look at this as an area that they need to invest in, so that they properly support this, because it's an area where you can't necessarily make a profit yet, but it's absolutely vital going forward. But one of the other things that came up in the panel just now was the importance of recycling. And we have very strong universities here, and we've got some fantastic research that's going on, including on recycling and getting the minerals back out of, for example, the batteries that are currently in use. And that's, if the United Kingdom has got a lead in that, that's the kind of thing which we've got to make sure that we support to scale up in the UK as a UK-based business, and don't see that simply going overseas. What can happen is that the scaling up of our businesses move to the United States, where there's obviously major funding. So that those are the kind of things that, if our economy is to grow, as the government says it wants to, and these are the new areas. That's the kind of thing where they need to look at it and see what support needs to go in.
So recycling could be something that could make that happen.
Yes.
In terms of, because we don't have a lot of we have a lot of resources, but we just don't do a lot of mining in the UK compared to the other countries. Could the UK perhaps be a hub for processing some of these materials? So we get the materials from other countries, but we actually become a hub for processing them and then selling them on.
It could be. And one of the things that was welcome in the budget was UK Export Finance being tasked with supporting those who are mining or processing critical minerals elsewhere in the world, providing that they are imported into the UK.
Okay.
Now that support on critical minerals is new for UK Export Finance. And that's, I think, an important recognition of what we've got to do in terms of critical minerals.
Okay. And every day we seem to be seeing China making ever more sort of export bans. And I know they've locked up a lot of, particularly rare earths, for example, they've locked up a lot of that market, pretty much all of that market, really. Is the UK behind the curve, do you think, on sort of, do we have to play catch up?
We all are. We all are. All the Western countries.
Yeah.
And I think that's recognised, but how you actually then address it is another matter.
Right.
So China is definitely ahead of us in this, and I saw a presentation earlier this week about Chinese control in various areas. Copper, it isn't as great as in something like the rare earths.
Yeah.
And that is in terms of ownership of mines in different countries. It isn't necessarily the geography that is relevant here. China has been aware of this, and there's also manipulation of prices, and as you say, not being willing to export things. So, for example, the ban on exporting graphite. So there are all sorts of challenges here, and we're going to need to work very closely with our allies on this.
Yeah.
And there is always a risk that each country will sort of peel off on its own and look after its own interests, and not the collective interests. And we have to see also what the United States does.
Well, the United States, yes, and they're not going to go down without a fight against the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese play, I think, a much more longer game, perhaps. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Do we just start thinking less shorter term, much longer term in the West?
Yes, I mean, we've got electoral cycles.
Yeah.
And we've got obviously all sorts of political pressures, which you don't have in an authoritarian regime.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can look strategically over a long period, and that's exactly what they've done. And that is a reality. And I would also expect that they may improve their own ESG standards.
Okay.
If, for example, they're operating within Europe, they'll know they'll need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be fleet of foot, and we need to be aware of that too.
Okay.
And that may happen. We saw that. Their engagement in Peru, for example, in the 1990s, they were the mining companies there would be decimating communities and so on. There was a public backlash. They didn't have the ability to operate there, and the Chinese government made sure that changed.
Okay.
And we can't be certain that there will be that difference in terms of the quality of the approach between China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, okay.
If that makes an economic difference to China.
The final question, just on what perhaps the UK. I know you said we're waiting on this industrial strategy to come out, and we'll see what's in that report there. But are there any sort of actions that the UK government are sort of taking to perhaps encourage or make things easier? For example, the Cornish, to whether it's direct involvement with staking in companies or grants, or just sort of dropping regulatory hurdles to encourage what resources we do have in the UK to be exploited.
Well, they've got a new centre on regulation, which again is welcome, looking at what the barriers might be. And so the draft industrial strategy is already out.
Okay.
And what needs to happen is feeding in to make sure that the final conclusions, which will be published, I think, in the spring, are ones which reflect this area.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Baroness, and all for talking to us today here at Resourcing Tomorrow in London.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.